Hey guys, Ben from BensGameTime here, and Crash 3 sucks. Now, I know that the title of this video is really hyperbolic, but I don't think Crash 3 is a bad game, but compared to both Crash 1 and 2, it's a bad Crash Bandicoot game. I've been playing a lot of the Insane Trilogy recently, and after playing each game back to back, it is clear as day that Crash 3 is very different from the other Crash games. If I had to describe Crash 3 in one word, it would be gimmicky. There are far too many gimmick levels to the point where it is debatable as to whether or not this game is even a platformer. Now, that isn't to say all gimmick levels in a platforming game are bad. Crash 1 and 2 both had levels that strayed from what it means to be a traditional platformer, but they also still had plenty of levels where platforming was the main focus. Crash 1 only had two types of non-platforming levels, the boulder chases and the pig rides. However, with the boulder levels, there was still a lot of platforming to be had, so it didn't feel like a gimmick level. Crash 2 brought back the boulder and animal ride levels and added a few new types of gimmick levels. Added to Crash 2 were some surfing levels and a few jetpack levels. The surfing levels are fine because there are still some platforming parts to them, and even then there are only 3 or so in the whole game. I didn't enjoy the jetpack levels that much. They felt tacked on at the end of the game so the player knew what to do in the final boss. Now let's look at how many gimmick levels we have in Crash 3. Well, the boulder and animal ride levels return again. We'll talk about the animal levels later, but they don't really change from what was done before. In the boulder levels, the boulder has been replaced with a triceratops, which is fine because some of the boulder levels in Crash 2 had a bear instead. But there's a problem with these levels. See if you can spot it. The level is flat. These chase levels are all flat, which detracts from the platforming elements of these levels. The chase levels in Crash 1 and 2 were downhill, making it so some platforming needed to be done to complete the level. Verticality is essential for platformers. Even 2D games like Super Mario Bros. Required some vertical movement. Without vertical movement, you aren't platforming, you're just jumping hurdles. Added to Crash 3 are some levels where there is no platforming at all, and there are a lot of them. First are the Wave Rider levels. Here you mount a jet ski and just follow the track to the end of the level. The obstacles aren't even that dangerous and can be avoided with ease. These levels are just boring, which sucks because there are like 3 or 4 of these in a game with less than 30 levels. Next up, you got the underwater levels. Here you gotta swim past mines, sharks, eels, and other generic shit. Occasionally you get a vehicle to swim faster and shoot missiles, but they're only temporary. The biggest problem I have with these stages is that all the obstacles have their own gravitational pull, so sometimes you'll try to avoid something but get pulled into it anyway. Luckily, there are only 2 of these in the game, as they are the worst levels in Crash 3. Next up are the motorcycle levels. These levels have you race against these scientist dudes on a straight road, but you start in last place. The big problem is that you need a near perfect run in order to win, and only by a small margin. At most, you're allowed just 1, maybe 2 mistakes, and you need to get first to get the purple crystal. What makes this so bad is that sometimes you've got these turns that you have to slow down on so you don't go off-road. There is no drift option in these levels. Your Crash will do it sometimes if you turn hard enough, but some turns are too tight even for him. Name another game where you have to slow down to win a race because the turns are far too tight. And oh, by the way, there's 4 of these in the game. Lastly, you got the airplane levels. Here you just have to shoot down all the targets while avoiding the other fighter pilots, or just race through a series of rings. These levels are incredibly short and are over before they start. There are only 3 of these in the game, but because they are so short, it feels like they just take up space where longer levels could have been. Overall, there are just way too many gimmick levels in Crash 3, and in a platformer, you don't want that. Another major problem that I have with Crash 3 is that the game feels the need to make it so you have to play as a specific character for certain levels. Most levels you can play as either Crash or Coco, but for the Wave Rider and Animal stages, as well as one of the bosses, you have to play as Coco. So why don't I just play as Coco for the whole game? Because the motorcycle levels require you to play as Crash. This decision is just idiotic since it wastes time that could be spent actually playing the game. Instead of just jumping into a level, I have to stop, check to see what character I need, switch characters, and then finally I can start the level. It would be fine if Coco was just a cosmetic option for the game, and I could play every level as either Crash or Coco, but no, they had to pull this shit. This just adds unnecessary tedium to the game, which makes the whole experience less enjoyable. Lastly, Crash 3 makes the time trial relics a requirement instead of an optional side thing. Every 5 time trial relics you collect unlocks a new level or a new way to enter a level, which is required for 100% of the game and for collecting the yellow colored gem. I prefer how time trials were handled in Crash 1 and 2, making them optional side missions to test your skill. Making them a requirement for unlocking levels and getting all the gems, as well as unlocking the game's true ending, makes no sense. Crash 3 is just not a platformer. It is a game filled to the brim with gimmicks to the point where it never has a real identity to it. Crash 1 and 2 had an identity. You could look at those games and say, yeah, that's Crash Bandicoot. When I look at Crash 3, I don't see a Crash Bandicoot game. I just see it as the third one. I did not enjoy playing Crash 3, but I really can't call it a bad game. While it is way too gimmicky, it still functioned well, and at times I did have fun playing it. However, it will never be on par with Crash 1 or 2. 27 boxes out of 50.